the newsagents.
No one in the United States of America is making anything of this. I mean, I feel I'm slightly going down a rabbit hole here, but why is there such an interest from Elon Musk
and the Trump campaign generally,
from
Sophia Patel's LinkedIn posts? It
doesn't make any sense in and of itself.
In today's spirit of cross-party working, will the Deputy Prime Minister join me in applauding the brave Labour staff members who've travelled across the Atlantic to campaign against Donald Trump?
Mr. Speaker, I'm loving this loving. I don't often get it. But I say to the honourable gentleman is that people in their own time often go and campaign, and that's what we've seen. It happens in all political parties. People go and campaign and they do what they want to do.
That was Angela Rayner standing in for Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's Questions, and the question was from Stephen Flynn of the SNP. And who doesn't like volunteering? Volunteering is to be encouraged by everyone and anyone. But it seems it has brought a formal complaint from the Trump campaign to the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, about what on earth Labour activists are doing in America.
Donald Trump's campaign team have called it blatant foreign interference. And today we're going to dig a little bit deeper and ask what is really going on between Donald Trump, the Labour Party and Elon Musk. Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And Lewis is back. How lovely to have you back in the studio.
With a little bit less hair.
With less hair.
But a very nice suit.
Thank you. Why? There's always a little bit of an edge to it, isn't there?
It's just because you're sitting in the middle.
It's because, yes.
Ping pong, basically.
And you wonder why I've been away for a few days. I just had to just try
to regroup.
Yes, regroup. These verbal onslaughts that we have daily.
No, it was extraordinary when we saw the press release from the Trump-Vance campaign complaining about the far-left Labour Party influencing the US election, telling Kamala Harris what to think and her radical way out ideas, and they are responsible for the lunacy of the Harris campaign because, a few Labour supporters have gone out and stuffed envelopes in Madison, Wisconsin. It seems a bit far-fetched.
OK, so there are two ways of looking at this, I think. The first is that it started with a LinkedIn post, which a Labour staffer made and then deleted, which offered not just the chance to volunteer, but what sounded like free accommodation. There is nothing illegal about going to volunteer, going to campaign. Both parties do it, have done it over decades in all the US elections because, quite frankly, they're quite fun. US elections are quite fun. If you're a politico in this country, it's quite nice to be involved in that way. There is nothing illegal about it as long as you are volunteering and you're not receiving money. And the trouble with the LinkedIn post was it suggested that there was, free accommodation or something, money in kind, if you like, for going to do this, which technically would take, I guess, Labour or campaigners into a slightly greyer area.
Yeah, so this basically refers, that LinkedIn post that Emily mentioned, it was from a woman called Sophia Patel, and she's quite a senior Labour person. She's Labour's head of operations. And she posted this on LinkedIn last week that almost 100 Labour Party volunteers, yes, they're Labour officials, but they're doing this in their spare time, not being paid for it or anything like that, were heading across the Atlantic to campaign for Democrats in key swing states. She mentioned North Carolina in particular. And she said this: I've nearly 100 Labour Party staff, current and former, going to the US in the next few weeks, heading to North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania and Virginia. I've 10 spots available for anyone available to head to the battleground state of North Carolina. And this is where the sort of controversial bit comes. She says, we will sort your housing. Email me on labourforkamala@gmail.com if you're interested. And so the we in that, it is being suggested by the Trump campaign and critics of the Labour Party in Britain, suggests that the Labour Party on some level was organising it. I don't think that would be the case. I think this is just Labour people in their spare time organising it. But that is what the Trump campaign have alighted upon.
The Trump campaign release is also worth reading because it is it's sort of weird. I mean, it says, in 2 weeks, Americans will once again reject the oppression of big government that we rejected in 1776.
Cue King George.
King George
George
III
III.
and the Labour Party.
I know,
A lot in common.
Very, very, very similar sort of policies.
Both egalitarians,
Big government, bloated welfare state, mass nationalisation. George III, he was a right old lefty.
Red George.
Red George. Well, red coats, Red George.
Quite.
So that is where the Trump campaign have taken it. What is interesting about this, and there are bits of it that just don't add up to me, no one in the United States of America is making anything of this. We on this side of the Atlantic are thinking, oh my God, the Trump campaign has turned its fire. This is going to be a terrible embarrassment for Keir Starmer if he becomes Prime Minister. What's the relationship going to be like with Donald Trump if Donald Trump wins
There
the
is
election?
no mention of this.
And no mention
in any of the US media.
It turns out that US media doesn't think that North Carolina is going to be swung by 100 current and former Labour Party activists.
Popping
No.
over from Twickenham
Yeah.
to knock on a few
Labour's
doors.
coming, right? Hey!
Well, Labour's coming.
Kamala
We'll
Harris
be
is
very
Sound of it,
afraid.
you think that they are. I mean,
Yeah.
Trump is trying to sound very afraid. I'm imagining John O'Farrell at this point, who wrote that sort of seminal book, Things Will Only Get Better, about how hard it was to be continuing on the losing side as a Labour campaigner in the pouring rain when everyone shuts the door in your face. I think he and his ilk will be delighted by the sense that they have this much power in the whole
Trump
thing.
should be thrilled, but as soon as they find out about Labour's electoral record, then he'll probably almost certainly win the White House in November.
So what is going on? Because there is something about this that doesn't... I mean, to report this to the Federal Elections Commission, the FEC, it's a big move. I mean, I've never seen this happen before about foreign interference. Is it just to deflect attention from when the Democrats accused him of Russian collusion? He is now saying there is British collusion.
Well, okay, so the short answer to that, I guess, is like Nigel Farage, right? I mean, Nigel Farage appeared at quite a few of the rallies with Trump in 2016. He made a point of saying earlier on this year that he wasn't going to stand as the MP for Clacton, and he felt that he had to give his attention to a much bigger battle, which was helping Trump get elected. For some reason, that's not election
Trump
interference.
doesn't have much of a problem with that, weirdly.
No, I mean,
You're not saying there's inconsistency.
No, I wouldn't say
weird,
that
isn't
about
it?
Don, because he's a very
But
solid
I guess,
man.
we talked to Farage when he was at the Republican National Convention. So technically, should we be asking the same questions of Labour campaigners? Yes, I guess we should. Except I think this story goes quite a lot deeper than what we're getting from the original statement from Trump or from Labour, because I've been told that it goes back to a court case that Elon Musk is bringing against a man called Imran Ahmed. Now, Imran Ahmed was a former Labour strategist, formerly worked with Morgan McSweeney on Labour Together, the campaign essentially that was the body that built a structure to try and get Labour elected. And Imran Ahmed then went off and started up his own not-for-profit organisation called CCDH. It's the Campaign to Counter Digital Hate. And the Campaign to Counter Digital Hate has been pretty clear about what they think is the main threat to misinformation at the moment, and that is Elon Musk. So there is a way of looking at this story which says, OK, this is not actually Donald Trump getting his knickers in a twist because 20 people from Twickenham are going to knock on some doors. It's that Elon Musk knows that these people are out to get him. He's having a war already with the CCDH because they want to destroy Twitter. And he said, yeah, I'll see you in court for what you're doing, which I think gives a little bit more context to why this is suddenly...
But then, briefly, then what you're saying is that it's not the Trump-Vance campaign that we're talking about on November the 5th. It is the Trump-Musk campaign that we are talking about. And that Musk is able to pull the strings now because of the huge amount of money and the loaning of the algorithm to Donald Trump, that he is able to tell the Trump-Vance campaign what press releases they put out, which is astonishing.
I mean, it could be about that, but also be subtler than that, right? In that there is... I mean, it's clear that when we talk about a war, Musk has been tweeting in explicit terms about this story and about others, and tweeted that this is war, and that, we know that he has had, obviously, conflict with the Labour Party or the Labour government since it came into office. And I think what you're seeing here, right, is basically, it's not just the sort of Trump-Vance sort of movement on this. It is the sort of full concerted forces of Maga coming for the Labour government. And why would they do that? Well, part of what it is as you said, Emily, but I suspect part of it is because as a result of what Musk does, and as a result of the algorithmic changes, and the fact that Musk has been waging this war for months, I think the most telling line of that press release actually was about when they said that Kamala Harris was imitating the far left Labour government in Britain. Keir Starmer's far left Labour government. Like, a lot of people would be like, Keir Starmer's government, far left. A lot of people would like it to be substantially more left-wing than it is, certainly not far left. But I think that tells you something about the way, because it's all one information ecosystem, right? Musk has been pumping this stuff out about Starmer, about the idea that, that they're cracking down on liberty, on freedom, on all of this stuff for months and months and months. And people around Trump and the people at the top of that campaign pick up on it. It is one big Maga ecosystem, and it's one big family.
The other thing about that is that, do we think that Elon Musk, because he's only got to run SpaceX, Tesla, X, everything else, is taking a really acute interest in British politics and is following battles within the cabinet and Angela Rayner versus Keir Starmer over this or that? Or is he being fed this stuff from someone in Britain who also wants to do the Labour government down? I mean, I feel I'm slightly going down a rabbit hole here, but why is there such an interest from Elon Musk
and the Trump campaign generally, from Sophia Patel's LinkedIn posts?
It doesn't make any sense in and of itself.
I think that the question then becomes about whether or not kind of what impact this has, right? In a sense, if there is a Trump presidency, because I mean, we know that kind of like ideologically, clearly, Starmer would be ill-attuned politically, personality, everything with a Trump presidency. We kind of know that. I mean, like, if on one level, if the Trump campaign is surprised that there are Labour Party members, activists, officers who want Kamala Harris to win, I mean, why on earth would you be surprised, right? I mean, like, literally, I would guarantee that 100% of the Labour Party, 100%, from like the most Blairy of Blairites to the most Corbyn-y of Corbynites, every single one of them want Trump to lose. That is just, they're a sister party of the Democrats. And that would be the case with any Republican candidate, and particularly so with Donald Trump. But in terms of the impact that it has, you can imagine, even though it's basically a non-story in so many ways, you can totally imagine it's the sort of thing that Trump will still be talking about in 3 years' time if he's president. You can still imagine him saying, "Oh, we had that problem here with and all that sort of stuff." And so you can imagine, we know he's a petty, thin-skinned man, and he will remember it. I mean, one of the things that is coming out just as we're recording this is the Republican. I mean, because obviously this is about 100 activists, but the Republican Party is asking questions about who paid for Morgan McSweeney, Starmer's chief of staff, and Matthew Doyle, his head of comms, who paid for their flights to go over to Chicago to the Democratic National Convention when we were there in August. What were they doing? Were they advising the Democrats? In what capacity? And all of those sorts of things. So you can imagine this, as ridiculous as it does put Starmer in a difficult position, because he suddenly is basically, if there is going to be a Trump presidency, is starting it with a relationship in an instantly bad place, in one that was already going to be difficult to calibrate and navigate.
Look, go back to July 2019, when Donald Trump more or less has the British ambassador to Washington fired.
Yeah, quite. Yeah.
I mean, Kim Darroch was sitting pretty as our ambassador in Washington. He was due to be extended in his role, and a story comes out in the Mail on Sunday revealing that he had written telegrams to Foreign Office officials which were candid, which is what the job of a diplomat is, and was saying that there was chaos in the Trump administration in certain levels and other places. And Trump was so furious that our ambassador to Washington had written this. He says, Darroch's got to go, and Boris Johnson fails to support him in the Tory leadership contest, and Darroch does go.
I think there's a really interesting context to this, though, which is whether the government of the day can ever suggest an opinion on who should, be somebody else's government. So we know the diplomatic lines. We know what politicians say when they're asked, who do you want to win the election? They always say, oh, that's for the American people, that's for France's side, that's not something for the UK government. Every country has to self-determine their own leadership, blah, 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 blah. But I think it is a question that is particularly pertinent to America right now, when you've got people like John Kelly, a former general, Trump's former chief of staff, saying that Trump essentially showed fascist behaviour when in power.
Well, that's the ultimate kind of lie, right? Which is at the heart of, you can understand why they do it. They kind of have to do it. But ultimately, at the heart of the kind of diplomatic dance, right? Which is we all know what all of these people think of Trump. They don't just disagree with his politics. He is a sort of sui generis, unique political figure because they think that it's not just that like he's a right-wing Republican. If like even like Ted Cruz maybe with the Republican nominee,
they don't care about Romney. They don't care about Rubio.
They wouldn't share his politics. They wouldn't like, and they wouldn't like what we're doing to America. But in a sense, as long as they were basically not going to destroy American democracy, or there was no threat of it, and they were going to leave the transatlantic alliance in place, then they wouldn't care that much. Right. But Trump, they do have a different opinion of, and that is a lie. I mean, I do think that interview with Kelly. I mean, obviously it's got more coverage in the American news, and obviously because it's got a British angle, I understand why everybody's been talking about this Labour story today, but it's barely been covered at all in Britain, that interview, which I think is it isn't just what he says about him. I mean, bear in mind, Kelly, he worked with him for so long.
Yeah, and he went on to say, I mean, he worked like hand in glove as his chief of
staff.
staff.
No one knows him better. And he says he actually shares some of Trump's politics. He actually says some of the stuff I agree with him politically.
Look, he says, he reports a conversation that Trump had with him where he says, I wish we had generals that were more like the German generals. And Kelly goes, which German generals? And Trump goes, and Kelly goes, what, the Nazi ones?
He commented more than once that, that Hitler did some good things too. And of course, if you know history, again, I think he's lacking in that. But if you know what Hitler was all about, it'd be pretty hard to make an argument that he did anything good.
So what would you say when he said to you that Hitler did a lot of good things?
Well, I tell him that. I said, first of all, you should never say that. But if you knew what Hitler was all about from the beginning to the end, everything he did was in support of his racist, fascist.
That Kelly interview, I think, that should be getting way more coverage in the British media today. Not just for the Hitler stuff, not just for the far-right stuff and the authoritarian stuff, but just so much of it. Him suggesting that he wouldn't even have a picture with amputees because he didn't think it would look good for him. Him not understanding why any American soldier had ever given their life for a war. I mean, at some point, I hear what you say, John, about not changing any American votes or whatever, or American minds, but there does come, you just have to say to yourself, this is absolutely astounding. These are people who claim to revere and venerate the American military, American soldiers, and they've got a former general literally saying that this guy does not respect the military, actually won't even be seen with amputees who've given their lives or given their
health. It's not even just the military, it's the actual constitution.
And it still doesn't make them a difference.
Doesn't
make a difference.
America,
These
right?
people need to wake up. It's unbelievable.
Can I just tell you one story about John Kelly and Donald Trump? That when John McCain died, which is speaking to your point about respect of the military, John McCain, the senator who'd been taken a prisoner of war in Vietnam, John Kelly ordered the flag above the White House to be flown at half-mast. Donald Trump sees it, says, I want it back at full staff. I don't want it at half-mast. John Kelly countermands it again and says half-mast. Donald Trump says, no, full mast. And the flag is going up and down faster than an elevator.
What you were going to say then, but well done for elevator.
Well done.
It's like when Emily's in the building,
saved.
the flag goes up and down.
We'll be back after the break with the Environment Secretary, Steve Reed. Well, we are joined now in the studio by the Environment Secretary, Steve Reed. A lot to talk about, but we're going to start with the announcement that you're making today about the water companies, about sewage, about the concerns that people have, and how you can make things better. And if you were kind of someone listening who hasn't got a huge amount of attention, who says, what are the three things that we can do to improve what we've got at the moment? Is there a clear answer?
I mean, I can focus on the three problems initially, then move on to what we can do. And people will be aware of the horrific state of pollution in our waterways. Pretty much every river in England to some extent is polluted. Last year we had the highest levels of pollution ever recorded in our rivers and our lakes and our seas, and that is because of the frankly catastrophic failure of the water sector as it's currently configured. That's what people see, and it worries them because if they go down to the beach with their kids, they're scared what their kids might catch if they go in the water. That should not be the case. When I was a kid, we could go and splash about on the beach and it was perfectly safe. We want our kids to have exactly the same experiences, but it's not just pollution, bad though that is. The lack of water infrastructure, because we haven't invested in it properly for a very long time, is now holding back economic growth in the country. So we're not able to build the amount of new housing around near Cambridge, because of a lack of infrastructure to provide those homes with drinking water, and a similar situation around Oxford where there isn't sufficient sewage infrastructure. So the lack of water infrastructure is holding back house building, the homes that we desperately need, and economic growth. The third thing I'll point to is that by the middle of the next decade, around 2035, if we don't increase our capacity for clean drinking water, then demand will start to outstrip supply, and there will be shortages of drinking water in this country, as we already see in some Mediterranean countries. So we've reached this situation primarily because the previous government failed to secure investment for our water infrastructure to fix it so it doesn't leak sewage, build the infrastructure to allow development to go ahead, and ensure that the water supplies are there for the future.
Just very quickly on that point about unless you build more water infrastructure, there won't be enough water to go round in 2035. I mean, that sort of supports the reform argument, doesn't it, that Britain is full. You can't have any more people as things stand at the moment.
No, it means that we haven't built the infrastructure to allow more homes. And incidentally, more homes doesn't just mean more people. There are a lot of people living in terribly overcrowded accommodation right now. I've got people in my constituency where you've got a whole family with kids living in a one bedroom with some cooking facility in the bedroom. Those people need and deserve a home, but the lack of housing in this country means that they can't afford one or can't get hold of one. So it's not just about population growth, but we can't build the homes we need in the places where we need them unless we have clean drinking water and sewage infrastructure in place. Businesses too, we can't expand businesses. Energy generation uses a lot of water. A lot of industry and manufacturing uses a lot of water. If it's in short supply, then we can't allow those businesses to grow. Now, at a time where growth is the primary objective of this government, because the economy is flatlined for the last decade or more, holding back people's aspirations, holding back people's pay, water is part of that infrastructure that will allow that growth to take place.
Steve, let's get down to business. What has to change? Do you think that Ofwat, the water regulator, is fit for purpose, or should that now be thrown out?
Well, from where I'm standing, the state of our water sector, all of those problems I just went through, is a failure of regulation and governance. Now, is it fair to say that's just because of Ofwat, it's Ofwat's fault, or did the previous government fail to give Ofwat the teeth that they need?
So
now,
you're not pointing the finger of blame at the water companies then, is that fair?
Well, they're operating within a framework that has failed. I do think the water companies have been wrong to pay multi-million pound bonuses to their chief executives.
Would that
while
be
they're
banned?
Overseeing failure. Well, I'm not waiting for a commission for that. I've currently got a new piece of legislation going through Parliament called the Water Special Measures Bill, and that will ban the payment of bonuses to chief executives of water companies and other senior directors unless they have achieved success in what they're doing. That will be for
success?
Well, what they won't be able to do is pay themselves bonuses if they're overseeing catastrophic failure and illegal sewage dumping.
Should they
in our
be
waterways.
banned, the companies, from making a profit?
No, because we need the sector to be investable. No, in my view, because we need the sector to be investable. If my analysis is right here, and one of the problems is we've failed to secure the investment we need to pay for that infrastructure, then we need investment to fund that infrastructure.
Because Welsh Water does that at the moment, right? In Wales, Welsh Water has no shareholders, and any surplus money is reinvested back into the business or into customer services. You don't want to follow that model in England.
But Welsh Water has the same problems as the water sector in England, and so indeed does the water sector in Scotland, which is nationalised. And we just saw the Olympics recently, where swimmers couldn't go in the Seine.
So there's going to be no nationalisation, essentially. You don't want to go down that road, and you don't want to stop companies from making profits. If
you look at what's happened in Scotland and France, they both have nationalised water sectors. They also have sewage in their waterways at a very severe level. So the problem clearly isn't ownership. I think it's regulation and governance. So I've charged Sir John Cunliffe with looking across the sector, root and branch, at what needs to change to give us the regulatory environment that can bring in the investment we need to upgrade our collapsing water infrastructure.
Could he have the same person at the top of Ofwat after he's finished?
I think that is I mean, I shouldn't really preempt what comes out of the Commission. Perhaps the Commission will say that everything's fine with Ofwat. I doubt it, to be honest. Perhaps they'll say, I mean, there are other regulators that have a view on this as well. The Environment Agency as well. Agricultural runoff and pollution from that source is a significant part of the problem we face in our waterways. So we want to look at a more catchment-based model for water pollution. So within the river catchment, you're looking at all the contributors to pollution. About half of it is sewage, about 40% of it is agriculture, about 10% of it is runoff from highways. But we need to look at all the sources of pollution and get a regulatory model that can manage all of that, so we can clean up our rivers, lakes and seas, so people can go in it safely.
You keep saying you don't want to preempt any kind of recommendations that come from Sir John Cunliffe. And
important that I don't, to be honest, John. Yeah.
I was once told by a Labour leader, you never set up a commission unless you know exactly what you want it to conclude, because you don't want to be blindsided by things that you haven't perhaps foreseen and are left with an embarrassing hot potato. You must know what you want.
Well, I think that's a somewhat cynical view. I don't subscribe to that. What we've done, but it's not a wrong view.
You don't just say, here, there's a blank sheet of paper, consider anything you feel like.
I've got a guy here with decades of experience in investment and regulation who's going to have a look at what has gone wrong with regulation and governance in this sector. But I'm not just pushing everything to this commission. So this is actually the third stage in a process that I initiated just 7 days after we won the general election. So I had in my office within a week the chief executives of all of the water companies, and we agreed an initial set of reforms. One of those was to set up customer panels so that customers have to sign off key decisions that they're taking. Another was to ring fence customers' money earmarked for investment, so it can't be diverted to payment on dividends and bonuses. That kind of was phase one. Phase two is the Water Special Measures Bill going through Parliament right now, which will ban the payment of unfair, unjustified multi-million pound bonuses to water company chief executives. They'll have to hit success criteria in the future or they won't be paid their bonuses. And water bosses who fail to comply with the law in key respects will face personal criminal liability for the first time ever. So, including that potentially. So, those
potentially, or yes.
Well, potentially, there's a sentencing council that need to take those decisions. I can't just instruct them. But, so there's two stages already, but then we need a wider reform of what's gone wrong in regulation and governance. This eluded the previous Conservative government for 14 years. They didn't even look at it.
Steve.
I'm charging Sir John Cunliffe to give a report back to me in June of next year. That will inform a much more thoroughgoing piece of legislation, a water reform bill, if you like, that will reset the sector so we can have a strong partnership between the government and the water sector that will serve customers and the environment far better than we've seen to date.
Can we talk to you about the other question that has sort of hit Labour's radar today? Is the government freaked out by Donald Trump suggesting there is blatant foreign interference coming to the US election from Labour volunteers?
Of course not. No. I mean, this would be far from the first time that we'd heard colourful language from that particular source. It's up to individuals what they do with their own free time and their own money. If people who are Labour Party supporters want to go in their own time to campaign for one side or the other in that campaign, of course the Democrats are more of Labour's sister party, then it's entirely up to them, and that's within the law here, it's within the law in the United States as well. Now, when it comes to the government itself, then of course this government will have a strong relationship with whoever the people of the United States elect democratically to be their next president in just a few weeks' time. Indeed, Keir Starmer, as our Prime Minister, recently had a very constructive meeting and dialogue with Donald Trump, establishing that relationship in case he wins the election. The special relationship between the US and the UK goes far deeper than any individuals, and it will endure whoever the American people elect.
When you talk about that colourful political source, what do you mean?
Donald Trump.
So what does colourful political source mean?
Well, he's made the points that he's made about people coming to campaign.
You think it's unreasonable?
I do, because he's had Nigel Farage coming over to support him. He's had Liz Truss, the former leader of the Conservative Party, going over to support him. In fact, Nigel Farage took over £30,000 from a donor to fund his visit to support Donald Trump. The people we're talking about who are Labour supporters paid for themselves. No,
So
there
it's
were some
sort of
issues
two
about
fingers
whether-
up to him saying
Well,
it's
there were
election
some questions
interference,
about whether Nigel Farage did or didn't properly declare that in the United States. I'm sure he will answer that in due course. But there's no question of any illegal or improper behaviour by any of the people going out who have supported Labour, going out to support Kamala Harris. And it doesn't, of course, affect the government's relationship with whoever forms the government of the United States.
Do you think this is coming from an Elon Musk place? I mean, you know that he has had problems in the past with former Labour advisors who have worked with Labour Together, your campaign group.
Yeah.
Imran Ahmed.
Yes, I know him. No, I've not heard or seen that Elon Musk has had anything to do with this.
Well, he's tried to bring a
Donald Trump is really, really good. You've got to recognise this. Donald Trump is really, really good at getting the headlines, and he's successfully done it in this case.
He's got the headlines here. It's not making headline news in the US. I just wonder what you think is behind this, because reporting to the Federal Election Commission seemed a bizarre move to do, given that.
Well, it's got.
Do they really think 100 Labour activists from around the country are going to make any difference in North Carolina or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or anywhere else?
It's hard to second guess what he might think, but he's very good at getting the headlines, and he's certainly got them. I've been focused on the UK, so I don't know whether there's been any headlines in the US about this or not. But certainly on the point of substance, it's entirely proper for people from one country to go and support their sister party in another. It happens always round, and indeed Donald Trump has had Nigel Farage and Liz Truss go out there, funded by donors, not by themselves, to support his campaign. So I think there's a different way of looking at this.
The government will hold the line, which is that you'll work with anyone in power.
Of course we will.
Trump arguably is a special case. You've got his former chief of staff saying he shows fascistic tendencies. He's a man who's ripped up the Constitution, who doesn't seem to have any allegiance to an electoral result. How happy are you saying none of that matters?
The United States is one of the world's leading democracies. Whoever they elect as their president, then the United Kingdom government, whoever that might be at any particular time, will work with them. And that's an absolute. The special relationship that exists between the US and the UK.
But most people in your party, Steve, they don't just not think Donald Trump should win. They think he's an active danger to the world, whether it comes to the world stage in Ukraine and Russia and NATO, and how he treats the voters in America. Why can't your party say that out loud?
Well, if you believe in democracy, as I do, as our party does, then whoever the American people democratically elect, I do, fundamentally, whoever the American people democratically elect, then we will respect that decision as people who believe in democracy and work with him. Whatever our private views, of course we will.
When Emily says that he is special, when he was president, he more or less had our ambassador to Washington fired for doing the job that an ambassador does, which is to write telegrams to the Foreign Office and to the Prime Minister saying what his candid assessment is of what's happening in the country. And he had to go.
Yep. I mean, one doesn't have to agree with every single action or thought that Donald Trump has done or said,
but
to respect the fact that if he's elected president, the UK will work with him. We will.
So work with him to the point of firing an ambassador if he upsets Donald Trump. I don't
think we should speculate on particular, scenarios.
It's not really speculation. It happened. That's what I'm saying. The Conservative Party did it. Would you?
I think our relationship with the US is very important for global stability, for the global economy, for global security. For all of those reasons, whoever the Americans elect, a Labour government will work with, just as any other UK government will work with them.
Steve Reed, thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, before we go, we're going to bring you the epitome of politics and cool. I mean, Steve Reed does pretty well on a politics and cool,
what
but I
about
think
me?
even you don't do politics, you definitely do cool. I think even Steve Reed would admit that some people have the whole politics and cool thing down to a fine art.
Some people have it, some people don't. Barack Obama,
annoyingly,
he's got it.
I gotta say, I have done a lot of rallies, so I don't usually get nervous. But I was feeling some kind of way following Eminem. Now I notice my palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. Vomit on my sweater already. Mom's spaghetti. I'm nervous, but on the surface I look calm and ready to drop bombs, but I keep on forgetting.
We should explain, he has Eminem there, in the wings, about to come on, and he's trying to beat Eminem at his own game.
Yeah, and as a rapper, he seems to be doing all right. So if he hadn't been a Harvard law professor, if he hadn't been a community organiser, if he hadn't been a 2-time president of the United States of America, well, of course...
World's your oyster.
The world's your oyster.
Bye for now.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.